Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment, and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host, and I have the pleasure to be joined for this episode by Faye Lawland. Thank you, Faye, so much for being here with me. I'm so looking forward to this conversation. And before you introduce yourself and let everybody know a little bit about you, I just want to say that I met Faye around 6 years ago or something like that here in Auckland.
At the
in New
workshop,
Zealand.
wasn't it at the workshop in Auckland?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's been quite a while that we've been in the same circles kind of here in New Zealand. So it's a pleasure to be joined by you here, Faye. So
Likewise, Brian. Thank you for having me and for the warm welcome.
thank you. And for everyone listening, would you be able to share a little about you and who is Faye?
Sure. Who is Faye? Isn't that like the lifelong inquiry of who is Faye? But what I can share with you, other than being a seeker, is what I do publicly. And that is in the work of internal conflict resolution. And basically what that means is I work with professionals who are tired, they're wired, they're uninspired, and they're looking for freedom from symptoms of trauma, depression, and burnout. And where I come into the picture is, usually those clients have tried many other avenues before they've come down this path. And I work with them to help them resolve the internal chaos, the internal confusion, the internal conflicts, so that they can find freedom from the trauma, depression, and burnout. And to do that without the medication, you're not going to like this, but without meditation, you're not going to like it. And without endless hours of talk therapy. And I do that working in either one-on-one, running master classes, day retreats, group coaching programs, and so forth.
Beautiful. And there's so many different little gems there that I want to unpack during this episode. But the first thing is, I don't have any issue with someone not giving meditation as a tool. It's a tool and it's a way of connecting, but it's also not for everyone. And a lot of the people that I work with, it's not the focus. It's, I focus with some people on, as well as you were just saying, on their trauma and the healing aspect. Yeah. And it's not that. But before we get into all of that, Faye, how did you get into this path?
Well, I guess like many wellness practitioners, especially in my generation, this is my third career. So when I was, a teenager and I was at school and my teacher asked, "Oh, Faye, what do you want to be when you grow up?" I never raised my hand and said, I want to be with an internal conflict resolution expert, or I want to help professionals free themselves of trauma, depression, and burnout. But like many, many people who end up doing this type of work at this stage of life, it has come as a culmination of a journey looking for solutions to overcome these challenges, right? And so I've had 3 burnouts in my life, in my professional working life. And with each burnout, or actually I should say from the very first burnout, Brian, I knew that the conventional solutions that were put forward at the time, which were medication and talk therapy, were not for me. But, I didn't know what else. So I just set out on this journey to inquire, to search, in order to recover from my own limiting symptoms. And eventually, as things started to get better, I kind of kept a log of what was working and what wasn't working. And because I was figuring this out as I went along and I didn't get to the root cause during the first burnout, the unresolved internal conflict presented itself again for the second burnout and a third burnout. And that's basically how I came to do what I did, because I've spent really like 16 years inquiring into what does it take to find freedom, not reduction, not living with, not dealing with, no, like freedom. Because our natural state is not a state of trauma, depression, or burnout. It's quite the contrary. So if we're hardwired for that, and my experiences weren't giving me that, my inquiry was, well, how do I get from here to here? And I just, I'm because I'm a seeker, like you, I'm a seeker, I'm curious, I love to learn, I love to understand. I just embarked on a journey of trainings and workshops and certifications, applying, principles here and there to my own healing journey. Eventually, when I did find freedom from those conditions, I put everything, I coded what worked on my healing journey. And now that's what I do with my clients. And that's basically how I came to do what I now do, and which I love. And I feel very, very, very privileged to be doing this work, as I imagine you do as well, particularly in this time of massive, massive global trauma. And with it comes massive global directionlessness, purposelessness, and all of the limitations that come from that. So I feel very privileged, especially in this moment in history, to have this ability to connect with people. Yeah.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing that, because I do think that I do feel the same. I do feel honored to be able to have done this path that now at this moment in time I'm able to share. And I loved, because you used a few of the words that I use, that is, help people to connect, to reconnect with themselves, to reconnect with those parts of themselves that weren't seen before. And as well, you were saying there's a big difference between managing something, living with something, and actually being free from that. And
totally.
And my belief, based on my trainings and all of the practices that I've done, show me that my natural state, therefore everyone's natural state, as you were just saying, is free from all of that. So totally. What really opened my perspective at that time, and this I'm talking now 15 years ago,
15 years ago, for my journey as well.
And like the thing with that is, for me, that it opened my eyes to the fact that this is already within me. I'm not, like this path of seeking. It's both external and internal.
Yes.
But there's, for me, a very big difference and a very different outlook in terms of being empowered, knowing that that's already within me. What I'm seeking, or the inquiry that we are journeying through, is actually to get to who we already are.
Yes.
Getting rid of all of the limitations, all of the veils that are on top. And that is, I think, that one of the things that I always try to convey to everyone that I'm working with is, you already are that. Now let's get there. Let's see how to get there.
Let me kind of connect what you just said to an area in my work that I'm very passionate about. Because, I tend to work with professionals that are very left brain, right? It's like, okay, they love the science of things, blah, blah, blah. And early on in my journey, everything that you said, those esoteric teachings of everything that you're seeking is within, I 100% subscribe to, and those were practices that, I started cultivating early on in my journey, and very powerful, as we know. However, until I came to discover the work of the nervous system, especially the autonomic nervous system, I didn't truly understand the biological, physiological implication of that these are actual biological states that are hardwired into our neurology when we know how to place our nervous system state in those states that produce all of those positive emotions. So the good news is that we're actually not just spiritually hardwired. We're not just spiritually hardwired for these states. We are actually biologically, neurologically hardwired for these states. And I find that so empowering, actually. It's so empowering because it's not just energetics, and it's not just it is definitely the matter, but it's something else. There's another word which now escapes me, and I find that to be very, very empowering.
Yes, and you know, I think one of the biggest things that for the last I don't even know how many years that has been for me a really interesting part of my own path on facilitating and supporting others is being able to understand more how to get people to connect with that. Because as you say, like, there's a lot of people that are open to what we would call more spiritual or esoteric teachings on more of the energy. And there's a lot of people that are more logical, science-based people. And it's not that this is for one or the other. It's about the language, and it's about what are the right keys that are going to connect to that person so that they open up to what you're saying. So I think that that's really important. And as you're saying that, because I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening that might have that logical paradigm and are more hardwired that way, or have been conditioned that way. Would you be able to
or
explain?
have been traumatized to be that way? Because we know that when trauma happens, a disconnect happens. We disconnect from ourselves, we disconnect from our body, and we live inside our head. So, you know, yes, it's, you know, the whole like being intellectual or mental or, you know, like rational, like there's obviously a lot of benefit to that, you know. However, being overly identified with that and not being able to know or see in any other capacity, for me as a trauma therapist practitioner, I totally immediately see it as a symptom of trauma immediately.
Yes.
Yeah.
So would you be able, let's go and unpack a few of these things. So let's start with the nervous system, and so that people can understand what are you seeing that is the most common that their people's nervous system is actually activating, and what's our capacity? Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to just before I answer that question, I'm going to take one little step back just to make sure we're all on the same page when we are referring to the nervous system, right? So your nervous system basically runs every single detail of your life, right? It's in everything, because it's your brain, it's your brainstem, it's all the connections to your muscles, to your organs, to your tendons, to your joints. It's also all the connections to the hormonal glands. And so it basically runs the show, right? It's everything. It's behind every decision, every health issue, every health asset, behind every behavior, behind every judgment. It's behind everything. And so when the nervous system is balanced, there are no issues. Like everything works the way nature intended it, right? However, with what we're seeing right now, I think you would tend to agree that almost all 7 billion of us on the planet, especially in the past 2 years, are not operating at that optimum. I mean, me included, you know, I mean, had it not been for these tools that I feel so fortunate came into my life before the chaos of the past 2 years, I know that my mental health would have been in the toilet. I mean, I know that, and I say that very openly. And so when we're looking at all of the limitations that so many of us are experiencing, both in our physical health and our mental health, that comes from a dysregulation of the nervous system. Basically, what that means is the nervous system has been spending too much time in one circuit, primarily the sympathetic activation, not coming out of that circuit, and then, but that's not problematic in itself. Where the problem arises is if we don't come out of this circuit, in order to conserve energy, what the nervous system does is it goes into shutdown, And literally then we drop into another circuit of the nervous system called dorsal vagal. And that's truly the freeze response. So these emotions that haven't been processed, these physical sensations that haven't been dealt with, these mind patterns that haven't been integrated, they literally become frozen. Like literally, as the name implies, they become frozen and stuck into our nervous system, which then means they're frozen into our biology, they're frozen into our emotions, and they're frozen into our behavior, because each neural circuit actually runs your biology, your emotions, and your behavior. And so what we're seeing around us today is symptomatic of too much time in dorsal vagal and not enough effort being done to come out of sympathetic activation when we go there.
Yes. And one of the things that, as you're saying, when we are in that place of activating only the sympathetic nervous system, not only we can get, as you're saying, into that freezing mode, we start to get into what I'm seeing a lot, the chronic stress as well.
100%.
There's not enough of the parasympathetic nervous system activation. And as you're saying, when we don't have that balance, we're dysregulated, and we end up being unwell, because wellness is being in that space.
And we literally crash. Like, if you think, this is quite a simplistic way to explain it. It's not the most complete way to explain it, but I think it's a good analogy to keep in the back of our minds to help illustrate the principles of what we're talking about. So if you think about the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system, or the stress response as a gas pedal, there's a lot of benefits to a gas pedal. Like, you need fuel. Like, if you're driving a car, you absolutely need gas pedal to move, to go forward, to get things done. It's not problematic to have the gas pedal, right? Mm-hmm. However, if in a car you're driving only with the gas pedal and you never use a brake pedal, well, at some point you're going to run into serious trouble, right? You're going to run out of fuel, you're going to crash, you're going to hurt yourself, you're going to hurt someone. Well, when we look around and we look what's happening nowadays, it is 100% the analogy of overconsumption of gas and absolutely no utilization or little utilization of the brake pedal. But there's one very important thing that I just want to make sure that our language is clean and clear about, and that is that it is not you who is doing this. I just think this is so important. It is your nervous system, It is the nervous system that does it. And I say this to my clients all the time. And it sometimes helps them to kind of like take a step back and to understand that it's not them. It's kind of like in meditation, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my emotions, right? However, freedom comes from being aware of these automated responses so that we're not fusing with them. So if you find yourselves right now in a state of, identifying with these symptoms that we've been talking about, chronically stressed, chronically anxious, really depressed, really tired, feeling really heavy, feeling directionless, feeling stressed, I just want you to know it is not you, it is your nervous system, it's your neurology. And just like your nervous system got you into those states for a reason, for your own protection, your nervous system has the same biological capacity to get you out of that state and into your desired state. And it doesn't take long, because it's it's wired into our biology. It doesn't take long.
Yeah, and I love that, because a lot of times I see this, we tend to identify some of the qualities, some of the responses that our our system actually is creating most of the time unconsciously, and this is one of the things.
Times, yeah. I mean, because if we were conscious of it with our thinking mind, we would not stay there, right? Okay, maybe we would have gotten there, but we wouldn't stay there. And we all have blind spots, right? Like, we all have blind spots. There's awareness is so expansive, and our thinking mind has such limited capacity for consciousness and focus that we can't with our thinking mind, grasp everything that's around us, which is why it's so important to keep connecting, to keep, creating some distance with what's around us, to drop in, to see what else is really there.
Yeah. And I was actually the other day with one of my corporate clients. I was talking with some of the employees there, and they were asking me, like, two of them, like I was leading a practice, and two of them fell asleep in 5 minutes. And they were like, oh no, I fell asleep. And like, perfectly okay. You just tapped into that other part of your system. And because it doesn't know yet, like the only time that perhaps you use that part of your system is when you fall asleep. It automatically, when you kicked it in, when you activated it, it was like, shut down, let's go to sleep.
Yeah. Because we don't spend enough time in that alternative zone. And we don't spend time either because we don't know of the importance. We don't know how to go there, or we don't prioritize it enough. I mean, we're of slightly different generations, but I know my burnouts came about as part of a conditioning of, it's a waste of time to rest and relax.
Yeah.
This over glorification of busyness and working hard and, working around the clock and not sleeping and skipping meals and not taking care of your body. I mean, that is a reason for my burnouts, but not the entire one. But, if we don't understand the importance of prioritizing this, and that it's okay to prioritize it, it's like what I always say. Yes, your nervous system has the capacity to neurologically come out of, the dangerous gas pedal situation, but it cannot choose the brake pedal on its own. It's like a switch. You've got to turn on the switch. There is a capacity for the nervous system to switch off, but it can't switch off by itself. It can't. We need some help. And part of that help means, A, you've got to prioritize it. B, you've got to set an intention to do it. C, you've got to, build it into your daily routine and daily life. And also, you've got to discover ways that work for you, practices that work for you, to bring yourself down from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Actually, it's actually called social engagement nervous system. Is the more actually now contemporary way of referring to it, but it doesn't matter. It's basically that green zone, and the thing is, coming down from that, not only is it easy, I actually find it deceptively simple. And I think because the practices to come out of there are so deceptively simple, we tend to overlook it, because we're so identified with our thinking scientific mind. Oh, anything that involves really just me massaging my brainstem is actually going to be good for my health and my focus and my productivity and mental health. No. It can't be that simple. I'm going to keep searching and seeking what's sophisticated and complex, because that's the only thing that will have credibility, right?
Yeah, and I think that's something that you said that for me is so important, that you were sharing how society, at least in some of our societies in the Western world, there has been a normalization of burnout, of stress, of being busy. Like a lot of people here in New Zealand, a lot of people when they ask, like I ask people, how are you? Instead of saying me a feeling, they respond busy a lot of times. Busy. And when they ask me how I am, I never use the word busy.
Me neither.
I use the word for schedule sometimes, but that doesn't mean busy, because for me, busyness is connected with that sense of stress and something that from the language that I hear on people. And I think that, as you're saying, like it's so glorified in certain sectors of business life, that it's actually an issue. And I'm happy in a sense that the pandemic has been a really challenging moment. And as well, it has brought us and shined a light on the fact that mental well-being is so important. and people can start to change that, and people can start to work a little bit on that. And as we've been unpacking certain things, I would love for you to share what are the signs, or what can people look for not reaching burnout?
Sorry, what can they do for not reaching burnout?
Yeah, what can they see that is perhaps happening just before that would happen?
Okay, so I basically put together, so as a result of this journey of mine, right, trying everything, I eventually coded everything. I basically then came up with a solution, a system that has 9 steps or 9 things or 9 pillars or 9, buckets of practices to find freedom from burnout, but also to prevent burnout. So that, these are principles that you can keep for awareness of well-being and freedom from burnout, but also it's freedom from depression, trauma, and so on. Because the part of your nervous system that does burnout will also do the trauma and the depression. And I mean, I don't know if you've ever suffered from burnout, Brian, but for any listeners, and long may that continue, but for anyone out there who either has gone down the path of burnout or knows of people who have burnout, you'll know that it's not just about the feeling of being tired, and it's not just about depleted energy levels. It isn't. It affects your biology. It coexists with depression. It coexists with anxiety. It coexists with overwhelm. It coexists with chronic pain. It coexists with chronic insomnia. So when I called my solution the tiredness solution, it's not just a solution for burnout, but of all of those other associated limiting, debilitating conditions. So there's basically 9 steps. You can find this on my website. And I'll just name a few of those steps that I think are actually quite key to keep in mind. I think the first one, which is it seems trite, but that's always where I begin with my clients, always, and that is assuming responsibility for change. So if you're feeling tired right now, if you're feeling overwhelmed, and if you're feeling like you're spinning your wheels and you're looking outwardly for assigning responsibility outwardly, it's your job, it's the email, it's your inbox, it's your boss, it's your to-do list, it's your in-laws, it's your balancing act. I'm here to tell you it is none of the above. Each and every time I had a burnout, I was at the height of either my career or my personal life. It has nothing to do with that. When I had my first burnout, I was living in Curacao. I was living where other people vacation, for God's sake, And if you looked at my life, I had it all. The burnout has nothing to do with that. It has to do with something a lot deeper than that. And if you don't assume responsibility for the outcome yourself, you are never going to be free of the burnout, the depression, the trauma, or the anxiety. So that's such an important place to begin, such an important place. And then second from there, if you know and or believe like I do that burnout is a symptom, anxiety is a symptom, chronic pain is a symptom, depression is a symptom, then you look for the root cause of that, right? So here I was when I had my burnout. I wasn't the only person with a busy workload living in paradise. Not everyone I know got burnt out, but why did I get burnt out, right? Well, there's many reasons why, but one of the big reasons is unresolved internal conflicts. Those are the root causes that live at the level of the subconscious mind and the nervous system that haven't been dealt with, that haven't been cleaned up, that haven't been looked at. What are the earlier life experiences that overwhelmed you? What haven't you let go of in your past? Who haven't you forgiven? What negative emotions are you still carrying and haven't dealt with? What emotional toxicity load is there? What limiting beliefs are still operating? What misaligned values are there? Like all of that is 100% going to drive your nervous system to sympathetic, keep it there, and then take it to dorsal and get you stuck there. So you've got to resolve that. You've got to look at that. And just because you're not conscious of it in your your waking conscious mind, it doesn't mean it's not there. You've got to look at your negativity bias, and I'm not just talking negative thoughts. It's not what I'm just talking about, but like do a negativity audit of your life. What are you listening to? What are you reading? Who are you hanging out with? What are you paying attention to? And what do you want instead? You also have got to work with the physical body, because burnout, chronic stress, depression, it shows up in the body, right? So you've got to work with the body. You've got to release tensions from the body. And I'm not just talking, go get a massage. It's lovely, but I'm talking about working with your fascia, your myofascia, the energetic systems of your body, because that's where these unprocessed emotions, they end up getting stored, right? Mm-hmm. You also have got to eliminate chronic stress from your life. Like, notice my choice of language. I'm not saying manage your stress. I'm saying eliminate, get rid of chronic stress. And yes, you can. Yes, you can. And unless you get rid of chronic stress, the seeds for the burnout will remain there. And the way to get rid of chronic stress is to actually look at those unresolved internal conflicts. And it's also in tandem with that, we're bringing in the brake pedal practices and activities into your life. If you want to prevent yourself from burnout, or kind of like do a bit of like a self-assessment of where you are, also look at your relationship with your subconscious, because your stress responses, notice my choice of words, stress responses. I'm not talking stress feelings. I'm talking about a response that's neurological, that's biological, that's hardwired into you. Those are subconscious, right? And your subconscious also has the capacity to give you what you want, but your subconscious speaks an entirely different language to your conscious thinking mind. And most of us don't know about the language of the subconscious. So we keep speaking to it using the wrong language. So it doesn't understand what we want, and it keeps giving us less of what we want, and we get frustrated, and the cycle continues. Start relating to your subconscious mind. Regulate your biology, check, look at your vitamin levels, your nutrient levels, but also look at your day-night cycles. Are you sleeping when it's time for sleep? Are you eating when it's time to eat? Or are you confusing your natural biorhythms by your choices of modern day living, which really are set up to make us sick? Like, I hate to say that's what it is. So those are the elements from my tiredness solution, my proprietary solution to literally find freedom from these conditions that you can use as a pathway out, but also a current assessment and a prevention of these chronic conditions.
Wow, beautiful. Thank you, Faye, for sharing that. I think for everyone listening, go back, just rewind and listen to that part again. And actually, one of the key things that I think that you mentioned, that one of the key things for me and with the Conscious Action podcast is actually the conscious action. Taking action is not just listen to this and it's like, oh, nice information. Actually, what you said, taking responsibility to be able to self-regulate and to understand, because sometimes we need, as we were saying, we need to hear certain things, or we need to read something that can be a way to what you're saying, to be free from all of this. And until sometimes we know about that, it's hard to know which direction to go. But now that you heard something, go and do it, because that is going to be the important thing. And one of the things that I loved and that I want you to expand a little bit more on is, I talk about this, like a language as well of trauma and what trauma and how trauma is stored in the body, how it's frozen, as you've been saying, and how that is not only preventing us from experiencing certain things, but also that is creating what in my language, I make a difference between reaction and response. And for me, reaction is the automatic one, the unconscious one, and response is the one that I'm choosing. We can use other words, or response can be both. But for me, when I did this work for myself, like I had to, even though, and I think this is key, even though I had a beautiful upbringing, I had really nice parents, and been really fortunate, there's still trauma that I had to resolve. And I use tools with movement, somatic practices. I use a lot of family constellation work. I use a few different tools that are some of the ones that I share now. But I think it's so important to be able to actually do that work, to be able to make, as you're saying, starting to push that like that break, and starting to actually action, because if not, it's just information. So I think that's really important. And what I wanted, Faye, for you to expand a little bit more is on that trauma and that internal resolution. How does that, like, what is it and how does that help people?
And it's connected to what you were talking about, which sparked something in me. And it's a common conversation I have with my clients here as well. So you're probably familiar with the work of Dr. Gabor Mate. Maybe your listeners are familiar with, like for me, he is regarded as a pioneer, as a real authority in the area of trauma resolution. But beyond that, for me, on a human level, I find that man one of the most human people I have ever been around. Even though I haven't met him in person, his human energy is experienced. You're nodding your head. I mean, he's incredible. And he famously and commonly and repeatedly says, trauma is not in the event. Trauma is in the body. It's what the body feels at a moment when there is a situation in your environment that spurs that internal response. Now, I just want to go on a little bit of a caveat, and then I'm going to connect all the dots together, because we're so conditioned, and I don't want to use the word brainwashed. We're so conditioned to not really look inwardly and not to feel our bodies, that we don't even realize what's there, even though we're carrying it and it's getting in the way of where we want to go, right? And I, like you, always discounted the fact that I have trauma, even though I was born in war. I lived in war. And yet I completely discounted the fact that I have ever experienced trauma, because at some point we were able to leave the area of conflict. And then what I heard repeatedly growing up is, we left early, we're unaffected by the war. That became my narrative. That's what I was telling my head. But my body had a completely different experience, right? Now, we left the war zone. I was about kind of like 5-ish. And lived in very stable countries where there's no external chaos. There's no external conflict. I mean, we're living in Europe and then Canada and the States. Like, it's as peaceful, stable as you can, ask for, especially in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Fast forward to the time that I'm 40 years old, 35 years later, like seriously, my life was a train wreck. Every single area of my life was crumbling, each and every single area. And eventually, all of this energy that wasn't dealt with, it showed up as precancerous cells, because your body is always speaking to you. Your mind is always speaking to you through the body. But all the previous ways that it was trying to communicate with me, I totally discarded. I mean, I discarded because I didn't know. I did not know about the mind-body connection. I also didn't know how to decode what my body was showing me. I didn't have the tools. And, it's really not our fault. I was never taught. How can you know what you don't know? You just don't know. I just didn't know. But that was a wake-up call for me, Brian, because I'm like, okay, like obviously now I've got two choices. Either I go down that traditional route of, God knows what, or I do something differently. And that's when some way, somehow, the universe always presents you with the next step of where you need to go on your journey. You don't need to know, you don't need to figure it out. When you decide that you want to take responsibility for yourself, start there, and then the pieces will start coming together and you'll start getting shown where you need to go next. So where I was shown next in my journey when I decided, there's something inside of me that's creating this inside of me and I need to unpack it and look at it. I heard about this thing called the subconscious mind, right? And so I booked in for a session with a hypnotherapist. And the hypnotherapist did for me what I now do for my clients. It asked my subconscious mind to go back to the very first time that is responsible for all the current challenges in my life. But the subconscious mind, it complied. It went back to the time that I was 5 when we're fleeing the war. And in the moment when we're fleeing the war, a few minutes after we left home, the snipers started and there was bombing in the distance. So my mom pushed our heads underneath the seats of the car, right? And I couldn't breathe. The system went into sympathetic activation and it never came out. And for 35 years after that, it became stuck in dorsal vagal. And I had all of these issues that I didn't obviously connect with my conscious mind, but they were stored in the subconscious. And when that story was resolved in the subconscious, basically when the stress arousal cycle, because the stress arousal cycle hadn't been completed in the 5-year-old. So when using hypnotherapy and the tools of the subconscious mind, we completed the stress arousal cycle, everything came right. And when you're dealing with trauma, I mean, this is what I do now in my clinic. Talking about the trauma is never going to resolve the internal feeling in the body in the conflict or the conflict in the body. You've got to go to the feeling in the body, unpack, trace it back to when it started, complete that stress arousal cycle at the level of the nervous system, and then move the nervous system forward so that the nervous system is no longer conflicted, thinking you're going to die or thinking that your life is in danger or thinking that you can't cope or thinking that you can't handle the threat or the perceived threat. And that's how you resolve internal conflict and therefore find freedom from trauma and depression without talk therapy and without medication and without meditation. I mean, this is how it happened for me. It took like 16 bloody years to figure it out, but that's how I do it now for my clients.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing all of that and for being open to sharing as well your journey, because I think that it's really important for us to hear like other people sharing their stories and the work that can be done. And even for someone that has been in war or in a situation of war, that, like you can actually free yourself from the response of that. And, and you were sharing from Gabor Mate, and I love his work. I've done a lot of the workshops, and one of the things that I keep on telling people is, even people like me that we've been fortunate, if one time my parents, when I was crying as a baby, didn't come and pick me up, I have a trauma that if I haven't looked into it and integrated it and resolved it from a feeling perspective, as you're saying, then I'm holding on to that. And it can be as simple as that. And that's one of the things that I think that now with the work that, as you're saying, Gabor Mate is a pioneer that has created, is actually looking that trauma is not just the traumatic event. Trauma is our response and how we are able to look into that feeling, express it, and feel and be able to integrate it. And I think that's a really important thing for people to know. And one of the things, as you were saying, my approach is preventative. My approach is we all have that.
Yeah.
Let's go and look into that before we get into that burnout, before we get into the really the hitting rock bottom, because rock bottom is a place that helps a lot of people, if they actually get out of that, to turn their life around. But why hitting rock bottom?
Exactly. Why? Can I just add something to what you said, which I think is so important, again, going back to biology, because trauma is biology, it's neurology, right? And then with it come, of course, the emotions and the behavior of trauma. However, it starts with the biology, and therefore the biology of your experience of crying and not being picked up is the same biology of me fleeing a war zone, is the same biology of you being yelled at by your boss, the same biology as, unfortunate rape and molestation experiences. It is the same biology, because your nervous system and subconscious mind cannot distinguish or screen through, this event isn't too bad, it's okay, it's not trauma. It is still limiting on a nervous system level. And as you said, we all have trauma, and what's problematic isn't the trauma. What's problematic is not resolving the trauma and not coming out of the trauma. That's what becomes problematic.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, there's, as you were saying, I'm so fortunate to be able to have done this work on my own way, with my own path, and to share the tools that I have learned, and have others like you that are sharing from another perspective, really similar, but other tools, other perspectives that some people are going to resonate with that. And that's, like one of the things that I keep on sharing on why I love having conversations like this on the podcast, because we all have a different way. We are all unique. So yes, exactly. We're all bringing our different gifts in different ways, and different people will resonate with them. And so if you're listening to this and you're resonating with what Faye has been sharing, go and check out those pillars that Faye was saying. Go and check out her work, because we all need to do this in our own way. We all need this work, and take self-responsibility to go and be like, I don't have yet the tools. I'm going to go and search for them. And luckily, there's people that have been doing this as their own life inquiry, and now they are sharing it. So for those Faye that are interested in being able to look into your work and potentially work with you, where do they go? How do they do that?
So my website is just my name, faylawand.com, but also, and I'm very happy to share this with you, to share on with your listeners, I've created a 30-day well-being calendar of nervous system practices that are all about the brake pedal, right? So that you don't get there, and so that you also have new tools, different tools to add to your toolkit. That's like an additional way that you can, start applying these principles in your life. And there's a support group on Facebook to help you go deeper with these practices called the Nervous System Wellness Tribe. And I imagine we're going to link all of these into your whatever, into the blurb. So yeah, would love to share those resources with you and support you on your journey.
Beautiful. And for everyone listening, then we'll have all of those links on the show notes. Go and check it out, because you can find this both for in-person work and online work. So yes. If you resonated with this, go and connect with her. If there was something that you heard that resonated with you and you want to share it with everyone, leave it in the comments wherever you find this episode, so that we can also continue this conversation. But thank you, Faye, so much for taking the time and for sharing. Brian. Yeah, and
thank you for this beautiful mission that you're on. I love the mission that you're on. I love the energy that you bring to conversations and gatherings, and it's a real privilege to have spent this time with you today and your listeners. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye, and thank you everyone for listening. And we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.